Alright, you can put the pitchforks down. I actually want to applaud the ZZZ dev team for implementing the style of tech reward system in one of their most difficult content, being the battle tower. Bravo! This was unprecedented, especially in the gacha game space. Everybody give them a round of applause. As an action game enthusiast, I am very appreciative of their acknowledgement of the game's emergent gameplay like assist counters, air combos, and many more technical skill-based stuff. I love it. And that's exactly why I want to point out some core problems that if fixed can possibly make this game's combat one of the best in action games. Like for real, the ZZZ dev team is cooking with that premium kind of sauce. So why would anyone want to listen to what I have to say? For context, I'm a purely free-to-play player and I've reached floor 100 and above of the Endless Tower Glory, not missing out on a single badge of glory along the way. That means I hit the minimum score of 60k for floor 50 and above. I mainly use Jane, who currently sits at the top 1% in the Asia server, M0 without her signature by the way, which is much harder to complete no damage runs with compared to characters like Yixuan and Miyabi, which both have huge AoE attacks. Like Yixuan's ult can actually group and crowd control most mini-boss enemies, long periods of iframes, and really high damage output.
I just wanted you to know how hard it was.
So you can say that I have quite the extensive experience actually interacting with the combat system. With that setup, let's look into the game's core issues with the combat system. I'm going to have 3 main points because most of the issues actually stem from the camera and how it works with the lock-on. I also want to point out that I've mainly played with controllers, so maybe a lot of these issues won't be relevant to mouse and keyboard. I'm aware that most of the issues I'm about to bring up have been around since launch, but they aren't big problems in regular content. They really affect the combat in the end game though. Now to the first major issue, the camera. It's mostly inoffensive when it comes to a single enemy, but the moment a second enemy, especially one that cannot be crowd controlled, comes into the mix, it becomes almost stressful to deal with. You see, how the camera readjusts depends on which enemy you're locked onto. It will always try to keep its perspective behind your current on-field character and facing the locked-on enemy. The issue here is when another enemy is behind you and you try to pan the camera to look behind, it will always force itself to pan back to its original state. And no, turning off the autocorrect camera does not help with this. And this causes another problem where enemies can actually attack you from off-screen. There is an indicator that will show if an enemy is targeting you, but you can't see which attack they are using. So that makes it hard to react to and you have to guess exactly when to dodge. One more thing about off-screen enemies, you cannot use defensive assist against them even though you time it right. It will count as a hot swap to the character of your choice, which will result in you getting hit. So you see what I mean by one core problem that sprouts more problems. I'll provide my suggestions to solve this camera issue before we move on to the other issues. Solution 1. Include an option to turn off the camera auto-adjusting completely with the intention of allowing the player to control the camera freely and only moves when the player controls it. Most importantly, allowing players to look behind their characters. The original setting can still be the default. Solution 2. For enemies attacking from off-screen. Here's something really good to be taken out from the Devil May Cry book. In DMC, enemies will not attack you from off-screen. Instead, they will walk into frame before they're allowed to attack you. This is much more fair and involves less guessing. An alternative solution is to have those arrow indicators have some sort of countdown or flash corresponding to the incoming attack and allow players to use defensive assist on attacks coming from off-screen. Alright, moving on to the next problem, the lock-on system. Other than the related issues I mentioned before, there are some weird quirks that the lock-on has that might mess with your decision making. The first one being it will stick to the enemy that is on screen even though you've dashed away and holding your movement direction towards an off-screen enemy. I think this is too strong for a soft lock. It makes switching enemies, grouping them, or simply trying to fit all enemies onto screen very difficult without it messing with your intuition. Here's my solution for this. Prioritize the closest target, which the game already does, with the exception of the player inputting a direction. So for example, if there are 2 enemies next to each other, enemy A being your initial target, but you want to switch to enemy B which is a little further away. Allow the player to hold the direction facing towards enemy B for the lock-on to switch targets. Apply this logic to enemies that are off-screen too. Now I think the reason they don't allow switching targets like this currently is so players don't accidentally switch enemies, because players might have low discipline on their controls and they might hold directions even though there's no reason to. I'm of the opinion that this isn't a very hard thing to overcome, but I don't know what the overall skill level and amount of effort the majority of players want to put in optimizing their gameplay is. But there's always the option of making this less aggressive version of lock-on an optional feature. I'm very sure all the sweats and tryhards that want to clear the highest difficulty content will appreciate it. The next lock-on issue is a smaller one. The lock-on tends to prioritize enemies on the same elevation as the on-field character. This means in a multi-enemy setting, the launched enemy will be ignored sometimes if they are close to another enemy that is on the ground. As for the solution, they could just remove the priority distinction and use the player's direction input as the priority instead, similar to the solution from the previous problem. It's not a big issue for the majority of players, but for combo fanatics, this will make juggling so much more consistent. It also won't harm the normal way of playing. In fact, it might allow players to juggle by accident, and it'll definitely be a fun moment for them. The last point I want to bring up is the actual enemy attack parry windows. This one is more of a personal gripe of mine. The way enemies are designed now is more about memorizing than actually reacting to the attacks, which I think the latter is more fun. What I'm referring to specifically is the attack animations and the window for defensive assist not lining up or being inconsistent. You kinda have to memorize specific attacks for enemies and when their parry window is available, because sometimes it just doesn't visually match. Some attacks have their parry window during the wind-up and some during the actual hit of the attack. It can get quite frustrating to be dealing with an enemy that has both versions, and worse if there are multiple enemies attacking you this way. This issue is much more apparent in fights where there are no flash prompts like in higher level content. Then there's the issue of non-parryable attacks, which are the ones that you can only dodge, being included in fights with no flashes. Now, like I said, this is more of a personal gripe. While needing to memorize specific poses for unintuitive timings for parries is doable, it consumes a lot of time to get right, hence making fights just a little less fun. I think that making attacks have more intuitive parry timings is the better way to design fights. My suggestion to fix this is to have all parry windows during the time when an attack would hit you instead of anything before. It'll be more intuitive and responsive for the player. As for the unparryable attacks, they can still be included, but they'd have to have obvious tells like the big back hop Miasmic Fiend has. I know that this is quite the subjective opinion. Heck, there could be people out there that want parries to be only during the wind-up animation, who knows. Just thought it was a notable enough part of combat that should be brought up. Feel free to disagree or maybe share your thoughts on this if you have a third preference even. I think that sums up all the main issues I've encountered while grinding up to floor 100 and above. Let me know in the comments if there are general combat issues that you think I've left out. I hope somehow the dev team comes across this video and considers looking at the issues I've mentioned, cause I really want to see this game become godlike as an action game. They've really made something special and fun, and I can't wait to see where they'll take it. So that's all I have for now. Stay crazy and keep styling. Jester signing off.